Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host. As always, tonight's show is presented by our friends over at Prize Picks, the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy. Joining me is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Dude, I'll be completely honest. I have delayed onset tiredness.
Same.
After those 3 days, I was feeling really good, feeling really pumped. And then there's that letdown where all the big hype thing is completely over. And you're starting to just feel a little bit more exhausted. It all kind of kicks in later. And then what did I do right as soon as the draft ended? Started watching undrafted free agents. So I'm caught up on like 6 of them now.
Yeah.
So I'm a little tired. I've gained about 10 pounds, I feel like, after eating nothing but pizza and wings and all that junk over the weekend. But I'll tell you what, man, it feels like it was completely worth it. All that grinding, all that hard work felt worth it. Like I said, the first time we did this, it was 55 viewers. The last few years, it's only been like 3,000 viewers per episode. We crossed like 32,000 so far over the weekend.
Yep.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. It was a blast. Next week will be, or next week. God, no, not. I couldn't do this next week. Next year will be so much better.
Yeah, we're currently past 13,000 views on our day 3 stream, which is more than day 1 and day 2. So I love it. Like we've talked about during the show on Saturday, this crew, if you will, that we've kind of put together over the last few years has really come out strong for the draft, and we're really excited about that. I woke up on Sunday and my eyes were still like tired from looking at this computer screen for 20 hours straight over this 3-day span. So, no, I totally feel that. And, some people are like, Nate Tice and some of these other guys already have like a big board ready for like 2025. I'm like, okay, so that's like the next level for us, I guess, is, like maybe next year we do the week after the draft, we do like a 2026 mock draft. Apparently that's the kind of niche we're building ourselves into now.
Yeah, I love it, dude. As soon as it ended and I started watching, all these guys, and I was bummed I missed some other players. And I'm looking at like the Beast and that art. I'm never doing that, by the way. I don't have any time for that. You got to pay me a lot of money to leave another job to do that. But I'm like, could I watch nothing but 2025 prospects all summer long while I don't have a job because I'm a teacher?
Yeah.
Yep, that's what I'm doing this summer. So I've now found a thing to do this summer.
All right, you're gonna participate in summer scouting. Okay.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to have half these guys fall out of the 7th round because they didn't live up to expectations. But yeah, man, I'm pumped. Alex Katzen did such a good job for us, and he knew everything. And that's why you bring on really smart, really talented, really driven people. Because now I'm like, how do I get towards that? Like, I'll never be able to because he's in this a lot more than we are. But how do I get a little bit closer? So a little bit competitive.
There you go.
But hey, we grew from 55 viewers in a live stream for a reason.
Yeah, no, I think both of you and I have that competitive itch to continue to take this podcast to new heights. So summer scouting is dangerous, man. I mean, Leonard Taylor was viewed as a first-round pick last August, and he went undrafted this weekend. So, it's a different kind of danger to live in. But I'm excited to see what that looks like. Usually in the summer, I go back and rewatch stuff from the actual Chargers season. Like last summer, I went back and watched like Rashawn Slater's tape from the previous season, or I watched like Khalil Mack and stuff like that. You watch like Kellen Moore's offense kind of deal. So this summer, I was definitely planning on watching like Greg Roman's offense and like more of the Michigan defense and stuff like that. So we all have our summer projects, and then it should be a lot of fun. Speaking of like, I guess getting into the nitty gritty, did you see that clip from Cornelius Johnson today?
I saw the one about how he grew up a fan and stuff like that.
Yeah, so he was on the Kay Adams show leading up to the draft, and Kay Adams was like, "Oh, like, wouldn't it be so cool if you were to go back with Harbaugh?" And he was actually like, "Yeah, I used to be a fan of when they were in San Diego. Like, they were my favorite team." And he like listed off his favorite players from that era. The third name out of his mouth was Legadou Nane. And I'm like, okay, that's how you know this guy was real. Like, that's such a deep cut. He mentioned LT and Rivers, and then Legadou Nane was the third name out of his mouth. So I thought that was really funny. Cornelius Johnson, who we're going to talk about tonight, it was just it was a cool interview to see. And obviously, his dad's been posting pictures and things like that. So yeah, that's a fun one for sure.
Yeah, that was a deep cut because every time I turn on like Madden, back when I started, playing Madden, I was 10, 12, whatever it was. Yeah, he was one of the wideouts. Him and
Yeah.
Anamalayuna. What was it? The tight end.
Brenden Mullen, the tight end.
Yeah. So those names completely, like, they just are a part of my brain. That's like childhood and the San Diego Chargers and all that.
Yep.
Yes, and for him to say that, I get it, because anyone can walk in and say, yeah, LT and Rivers and Gates and etc. You're going deep cuts like that. You start talking like Say as you're a 2-2 or something, or the 3 seasons of, or 3 games of Denario Alexander or whatever.
Yep.
I get you.
The oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on his name right now. The running back volleyball, Brenden Oliver. Thank you. I almost said Brandon Browner, but that was from the conversation over the weekend. That's the Seahawks corner. That's where my brain is at after watching all these prospects. So, it is what it is. We'll get to it. Okay, so today's show, this is all about kind of wrapping up, putting a bow on the players that the Chargers have drafted. Of course, we'll have some other conversations, about these players throughout the rest of the summer. But today, we're going to be grading each of these picks. We're going to be talking about strengths and weaknesses of the picks that the Chargers made, talking about their potential fits, really diving into the nitty gritty here. We also have some information from the Beast, which we did talk about a little bit on the stream. So that part might be like a little bit redundant for some of you who did consume all the streaming we did over the weekend. But basically, we wanted to just talk about, now that we know that these guys are Chargers, how do they fit with this specific team? What are their roles? What's their potential? What's their floor? All that kind of stuff. And we both have watched Tarheeb still now, so we wanted to kind of revisit that conversation. So this should be a lot of fun to dive into, and I'm excited to see how we kind of wrap this up, and hopefully you guys enjoy that. Before we get started there, we do have a new member today, Mr. Michael Simonson. Appreciate it, Michael. Thanks for joining up. And then a super chat from Caden Fitzgerald. He says, "Bolt up in Harbaugh we trust." So appreciate the new member and the super chat today. Always appreciated on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, new member. Welcome, or thank you for the super chat, Caden. In Harbaugh we trust. Absolutely. Got a little shaky after round 1 for some fans, but I think by the end of the draft, people were back on board.
Yes, 100%. All right, let's dive into this. Of course, we are going to be talking about Mr. Joe Alt first and foremost. Very large human being. So we presented a slideshow like this similarly on night 1. And then we kind of went away from it, but we wanted to get back to this for every single pick. So you're going to see why he was the selection, beast information, strengths and weaknesses, and then grading the picks is going to come at the end of it here, as well as like how they fit in here. So for Joe Alt, we can kick it off here. Why he was the selection. He was their best player available. The goal has always been to protect Justin Herbert. And then if you love offensive line play, I think you're very happy about what Jim Harbaugh said about offensive linemen in general. He views them as a weapon. He kind of knew, and I think Joe Ortiz knew, that people were going to ask about why didn't they take a receiver in the first round, and they were ready. We view offensive linemen as weapons. We really believed in him. He was the number 1 player on our board. And also, Adam Schefter had some really interesting conversations today on the Pat McAfee show pertaining the New York Giants and Joe Alt. Apparently, the Giants tried to trade up for Joe Alt. That was their main conversation around trading up to the number 3 overall pick. Was not for a quarterback. It was for Joe Alt. And then all of the JJ McCarthy Giants connections was apparently an attempt by the Giants to get Joe Alt to fall to them. Basically, their goal of the draft was to take Joe Alt. He was the best player on their boards as well. And then the Tennessee Titans also had Joe Alt as their number 1 player on the board. Mm-hmm. So, there's all the media stuff and there's all the coaching staff stuff, but it does sound like several other teams, not just the Chargers, did have Joe Alt as the number 1 player on the board ahead of even Marvin Harrison Jr.
Not a surprise. It's interesting because so many fans, and we did not view Joe Alt as the best player on our boards. Several fans wanted Malik Neighbors, Romo Dunze, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., any wideout. Some people had those guys ahead of Joe Alt on their board, but I think people were confused. Like, why did you take Joe Alt if he wasn't the best player available. To them, and it sounds like to many teams, probably after Marvin, he was the best player available. If you didn't need a quarterback or you weren't going to take a quarterback and Marvin was gone, Joe Alt was considered their next best player available. And I totally get it. There are maybe question marks with some other players, but Joe Alt was, I think, very safe. I think also has a very high ceiling as well. I would understand why he was their best player available. And getting to some of the quotes that you mentioned, like Jim Harbaugh said, it was a unanimous decision among the organization. Like nobody rated higher than Joe Alt. I think maybe there's a part of the quote that was like nobody at that time was rated higher than Joe Alt. So I'm curious if Marvin was somebody that was rated higher, but obviously he was gone.
Sure.
Joe Ortiz says, when you watch him, you get caught in a bad position. His ability to recover and get back down and anchor and front up late, that's what he can do. He doesn't get knocked back very often. When it does happen, he has that freakish athleticism to recover and get his knees bent and flex those ankles and get back down. You read any of the media stuff, you listen to any of the media or the reactions from Joe Ortiz, from Jim Harbaugh, like they felt like this was easily the guy. And Harbaugh again says, like, I don't think Harbaugh's much of a liar. He's going to tell you, or he just won't say anything. Yeah. He just flat out said it's a unanimous decision. Nobody on their board at the time rated higher than Joe Alt. So to fans who wanted best player available, it is not your best player available. It is theirs. And maybe I felt there was someone else who was better. Steven feels there was someone else who was better. But to the Chargers, they stuck to their guns, and this was BPA.
Yeah, and to that point, Ted Nguyen, who writes for The Athletic, talked about this too, and I think his perspective was a perspective that needs to be said about this regime. And the overall point was that fans, and I felt like he was writing this directly at me. He was like, Chargers fans think that Trey Pipkins is a serviceable, reliable offensive tackle. But for Jim Harbaugh, that's simply not good enough. Like Jim Harbaugh is not looking for above average serviceable. He's looking for dominant up front, and taking Joe Alt was obviously a step in that right direction. So, Joe Ortiz has talked about creating depth across the board all spring long. And this is obviously a great way to do that. Now the Chargers have Trey Pipkins, a guy who we do know as a reliable, serviceable offensive tackle. He's their swing tackle. And this is what drafting Joe Alt does for you. You create an offensive tackle trio of Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, and Trey Pipkins. If Joe Alt hits right away as a rookie, you're potentially talking about the best offensive tackle duo in the AFC. This is a very high ceiling offensive tackle room. I'm not going to put them ahead of the Lions right now or the Eagles because those guys have been there and done that, obviously. But from an AFC perspective, man, like this has the chance to be a great offensive tackle trio. And I'm really excited to see how it pans out now that we know that Joe Alt is the pick. I'm going to go back and revisit some things, go back and rewatch who he was in 2022, and just like enjoy the fact that the Chargers don't have an offensive tackle issue for the long haul. And this is a great situation for them to be in from that position room.
Yeah, as a great position, especially if he hits, obviously things are a lot better. Sweet Jum says, ask the Lions about Sewell's impact. Absolutely. Forgotten Locale says that transition from left to right better be smooth. Honestly, it doesn't even necessarily have to immediately be smooth. And I don't expect it to be. That's unfair to assume. He walks in, switches sides, and is an elite all-pro tackle from day one. I don't think that's going to happen. It would be awesome, but I don't believe it is. Penei Sewell is I honestly think him and Marvin are the two best players I've watched, and I don't think it's close. Like those two guys are awesome.
I agree.
Penei Sewell had or allowed 35 pressures and 5 sacks his first season. And that was a bit wishy-washy, right? He had to play some left, he had to play some right. I get it, but I don't think the Lions are complaining now. So even if it is a bit of a rocky start, you get him in through year one, you get him adjusted in the system, etc. I think he'll be fine. Again, his film is, and we can get into the pros and cons of what he can do, but he's so consistent. I truly, and the grade that we give him will reflect it. The selection that is, I truly believe he was a great pick for them. And maybe I would have gone a different direction. That does not mean that they didn't get a great player. They really did get a great prospect here.
Yeah, I think regarding the switch to the right side, Dan Jeremiah pointed out today that Joe Alt has been training on the right side all spring. He knew it was a conversation that would come up. He's been working at that. And then he is also like telling the Chargers, hey, like I want to be right tackle right now. Like I'm ready. Let's get training. He doesn't want to do the whole like switch back and forth. Maybe we have the competition. He just wants to play and be on the right side if that's the one. So I think he has the right mentality to approach this. Like he's ready to make this change. He's played tight end. He's played as an unbalanced offensive lineman on the right side several times. I think he'll be okay making the transition to the right side, and maybe not like, super. He's not Rashawn Slater's All-Pro rookie season is not the norm, but Joe Alt I think has the ability to come in here and have a very solid rookie season. Some relevant information from the Beast from Dane Brugler, which if you do not subscribe to The Athletic, Dane's The Beast is worth it alone. He was OT1 basically the entire offseason for Dane Brugler, number 5 overall player. He was a multi-sport athlete who also played quarterback, tight end, and linebacker in high school. He was a basketball player. I think he did track and field as well. This is a guy who was extremely athletic. His father, John Alt, was his coach growing up and was very adamant that Joe Alt was not going to be limited exclusively to playing offensive lineman right away. He knew the kind of potential and risks that those would incur. So he was all like, very in favor of Joe playing multiple sports, playing different positions, and it worked out in his favor, I believe. His dad, John, who actually we learned today, Mike Devlin, the offensive line coach, went to Iowa 4 years after John Alt was there. And Devlin says that they watched a ton of John Alt film at that time. And Joe does remind him of John like quite a bit. I mean, like shocker, obviously it's father-son here, but it was an interesting connection there that the offensive line coach was studied the Joe Alt's dad back in college. So we talked about Ted there every day. Joe Alt didn't miss a single game in college. He had, I think, 4 penalties across his 3 years as a starting offensive tackle.
Yep.
The consistency was just incredible. And then comparison-wise, Dane Brugler called him Jake Matthews in Nate Solder's body, which those aren't like amazing offensive tackles, but those are guys who have been in the league forever and have been serviceable, quality, above average offensive tackles for several years in the NFL.
Yeah, the Beast stuff, again, I'll reiterate what you said. If you're doing anything and you have any bit of money, subscribe to The Athletic just for this alone.
Yeah.
You open it up and your computer like crashes for 5 minutes because it's such a big document. That's how big the Beast is. Yeah. It's wonderful. And yeah, OT1 for Brugler, number 5 overall, number 5 for me. I want to say 5th for you as well.
He was
top 5 for both of us. 6 for you. Okay, we'll get to that in a bit. Outstanding individual. I loved watching all the press conference stuff with Joe Alt, all the behind the scenes stuff. His personality seems wonderful. Yeah, Joe's personality seems to be right there with Justin Herbert. I believe he's also an avid hunter and fisher as well. So it's all going to line up perfectly. He made he was kind of joking about the, what was it? What was the GM? What did the GM ask him?
What did the Chargers GM ask him?
No, he was discussing what a GM asked him today. You're goody two shoes.
Yeah. There was a GM who asked him if he's ever been in trouble and like why hasn't he been in trouble more often.
He's like, I don't know. Did I do anything wrong? Like he's so Justin Herbert's buddy. Like, very much.
Joe literally has football and fishing in his Instagram bio, so I think they'll be friends. They'll be all right.
Yeah, I think they'll be just fine.
So we can dive in here. Like you mentioned, I had him 6 overall, but as OT1, very clear round 1 grade for me. And then I do have this graded pick wise individually as an A-, which we can dive into. But for you, Tyler, if you had to just do the 3 positives, what would be kind of your main things here?
Yeah, the thing we talked about initially with him is that he's extremely safe. Like, I think we put it all in one spot here on this one bullet point, but the combination of an elite RAS, I think he's top 15 all time with that RAS. The round 1 film was fantastic. Like, this was a round 1, like first round pick kind of player, top 10 selection across the board for pretty much everybody, at least all the notable evaluators. Like, that was there. The 99 PBE pass blocking efficiency for 2 straight years. Wonderful. 4 penalties in 3 seasons. Like, Trevor Penning had 18 in 1 game, it feels like. very different prospects, but like there's levels to it, and only having 4 in 3 seasons is extremely difficult. I think for, you watch some of these prospects, maybe they have like 9 2 years ago, and like 7 the previous year, and then maybe they clean it up and have like 3 or 4 their final season. For all to have just 4 flat out in 3 seasons is incredible. That's a kind of smarts, it's a kind of athleticism, it's a kind of technique thing. It's awesome. So yeah, he was great there. So yeah, that really just all stands out to me.
Yeah, the penalties, for reference's sake, JC Latham had 18 across 2 years of starting, and Joel had 4 and 3. So it's just kind of crazy to me.
Yeah.
On the field aspect wise, I love his run game versatility. The Chargers run game, the Michigan run game, Notre Dame run game, it's all kind of cut from the same cloth. It's a lot of gap and power scheme based, and then they try to get to the perimeter, and it's a lot about creating space and creating alleys, and you have to have the kind of offensive linemen and tight ends to be able to do that. And so, I put on here, he can cave in one side or he can be a highly effective puller. I loved watching his ability to create space on the pin and pull concepts that Notre Dame would run. That was really what sold me on him over Olu Fashanu. As I talked about previously, Olu is like my type of offensive tackle, just springy and smooth. But the work that Joe Alt did as a run blocker, particularly in the pin and pull concepts, was just a true treat to see. And he's really able to create those alleyways, whether it's out in space, whether it's on the front side, whether it's caving in the backside. This is a guy who can do any kind of run concept that they want to do for the Chargers going forward. And it pairs wonderfully with Rashawn Slater because he can do all of those same things. So, yeah, Kevin Kernick pin and pull tape is elite, for real, no cap. Pin and pull is my favorite run concept. You have to run it right. You have to have the dudes. But if you run it right, you just create gashes left and right. And that's why the Ravens run game with Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson was so lethal, because they would run read option pin and pull with Lamar, and like it was impossible to stop. So I'm very much excited to see what this run game looks like with Rashawn and with Joe being able to do basically any kind of concept, because I think Trey as a run blocker, like he can move people power wise, but he's not the kind of perimeter blocker that Joe is. And so Joe having that kind of high end upside on the perimeter at the second level, it's just going to create so many new alleyways and new ways for the Chargers to create some explosive runs that they haven't been able to have over the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I really didn't appreciate his work in the run game until watching Blake Fisher later on. And that's not because Blake Fisher sucks or anything. But when you start with
rewatching it,
yeah, on rewatch, when you start grading and you've got 100, 200 guys you're grading, like you maybe got to go back and reevaluate some of the earlier guys because you have something in your brain that they have to hit that maybe isn't quite fair, or you don't have a reference point just yet. You need a bit of a refresher. And going back and seeing what he was doing in the run game with Blake Fisher, like it's like, okay, I missed something the first time around. I didn't appreciate his work in the run game because initially I thought, okay, like, is he as good as these other guys? And obviously then I watched Latham and it's like a different kind of powerful beast. So you think, okay, maybe Joe Alt like isn't that great in the run game. But then you go rewatch it and you think, okay, there's more here than I thought. So yeah, I think he's underrated in that aspect for sure.
Yeah. And then the last thing for me on tape, I talked about this previously, and I hope we get to interview Joe because I want to ask him about this, because Brandon Thorne has talked about the importance of being able to protect the corner and not let rushers get around you and loop around you and then be able to just flatten to the quarterback. It's like the fastest way to do that. It never happened at Notre Dame. Like I never once saw somebody beat him around the corner. And I think he does it in a variety of ways. And AQ Shipley talked about this. Like you can tell an offensive tackle's confidence level by how often they jump set, because a jump set is like basically like you're putting yourself on an island right away. And if you miss, then you're like your quarterback is SOL, unless you have like an elite guard who can like loop around behind you and help you out. But the jump set of his is a real strength. The deep set of his is a real strength because he has that length. He has that ability to just let people come to him if he needs it to. So he's he's really versatile at protecting the corners. And I think that's something, again, that I really started to appreciate as I went back and watched him a second time.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. When I'm reading Brandon Thorne's reports on offensive linemen, I think the number one like early thing he writes that's a criticism for a lot of these linemen is gives up corner too easily or makes it too easy for the edge rusher to win on the corner. So it's like to see that Joe Alt is someone who is much better at avoiding those pitfalls, I think is fantastic. I'm now going through Brandon Thorne's scouting report to see if he wrote that. He did not. Here's Brandon Thorne's scouting report. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 positives and just 2 negatives. That's it. So he loved Joe Alt.
Yeah, I think we have a couple here, and one of our concerns is that he's switching to the right side. Like, it's not even anything that like he did on tape. It's just like the position switch. So, for me, you can kind of put 1 and 3 here together because of his frame. It takes a very special and specific type of edge rusher to give him problems. JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State, that's the only one that you can find, and that's because he has instant power that he can just get on you quick. And so that was really the only game where I watched Joe Alt struggle a bit. And that's because JT just has such an ability. He has such a quick first step. And then he's so low and powerful to the ground that he did give Joe Alt a couple of problems. But even in that game, he only allowed 2 pressures. And it's like, oh, like his worst game was 2 pressures and like a quarterback hurry. So it's just, it's minor things here. Like, the 3 concerns here is just like, occasionally his anchor can be like a little too late. Like occasionally like power rushers can give him a problem, but he faced plenty of power rushers. Like he played, at Notre Dame. Like it's not like he didn't go against power rushers. So that is the one thing that like, Kapil pointing this out, going up against Khalil Mack and Thule in training camp is going to be great for him because he's going to get exposed to the kind of power that he's going to have to deal with on a week-to-week basis. And those guys are very open about like sharing tips and helping them out and things like that. So, I think it's going to like, if you see Joe losing to Khalil Mack in practice a couple of times, like, don't be too worried. Like it is Khalil Mack, but it gives him the specific problem and a chance to correct that problem right away. So I am anxious to see how that kind of goes in training camp.
And he has such, yes, the guys across from him, but just in general, he has so much information to pull from. Hey, Dad, when you encountered this, how could you do that? Like you were a Pro Bowl offensive lineman. How did you handle this? Ben Herbert, can we get a little bit stronger? How do I work on my body to do this? I mean, everything you can pull from Devlin and then from obviously Rashawn Slater. If you want someone who can anchor and figure out how to anchor and get that timing, you walk right to Rashawn Slater and ask how to do that. How do you manage this in the NFL? So a wealth of information. Clearly, as we talked about, the low penalties, the high PBE, his character in general, like this guy is very smart, very, very smart. Whatever the issues are, he's going to learn how to correct them. So, and he's in a great spot. This program is built around offensive line. So I'm excited to see what he does. Moving on to,
Arjun pointed out that he's like a computer science major too, or something like that.
Yeah, computer programming, I feel like was what it was. So him and Zion Johnson are going to be sending out like him and Herbert, they're gonna have some like signals or whatever, like their offensive line signals are going to be like coding. I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy. He's clearly a smart guy, and I'm excited to have him on the team.
Oh, DJ Blade Runner says he was a mechanical engineer.
Okay. There you go. Yeah. Which
Zion was like cybersecurity. And then Rashawn went to Northwestern, which is one of the most difficult schools to get into in the country. Like we just got a bunch of brainiacs that are going to kick your ass too up front. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. Moving on to Ladd McConkey, their second round selection. Obviously, they had to move up from 37 to 34 to take him. Why was he the selection at the time? They were desperate for an addition in the wide receiver room. I do feel like round 2, it depended on who was there, was the spot for them after they went Joe Alt. And they got really lucky because there were several guys that they could have pulled from, unless they really, really desperately wanted Keon Coleman, who went 33. Ladd McConkey was, I think, the best player available at wide receiver by that point in the draft. And he was a 4-3 guy with elite separation skills. Like I think that unique combination is awesome. And I think a lot of people aren't bringing up that combination. It's generally just, oh, he's a route runner. He can separate. Cool. A lot of people bring up the Hunter Renfrow thing. Okay. Hunter Renfrow did not run a 4-3. No, it's it's a 4.39 for what it's worth. This is not a 4.3 flat, but still 4.39 is 4.39, and that is a lot faster than anything else the Chargers have in the room right now as an actual wide receiver option. And as Jim Harbaugh said, like they like the 4.3 guys. He likes the guys that can run a 4.3. And Harbaugh specifically said he plays to that 4.38 every single play. You can see it in the way that he rages off of the ball and once he has the ball in his hands. And that first part is really key, especially if you're replacing Keenan Allen, who preaches you run every play as hard as you possibly can. Cough Adonai Mitchell. And you run it as hard as you possibly can. And so they have no idea what you're going to run. And so Harbaugh is saying that this guy runs at that speed every single play and is running as hard as he can before the catch, whether it's he's the target or not, after the catch, etc. Again, it just leans to that there every day thing that the Chargers are looking for. Ortiz said that he's a guy that all the scouts targeted. He was a guy that all the scouts and coaches looked at and all the scouts and coaches loved. So I don't know if it was particularly unanimous at that spot, but very clearly, and I don't know what else they would say, but the Chargers wanted Ladd McConkey and they traded up to get him. So now the question becomes, is he wide receiver 2? Does he have a role more prominent than Quentin Johnston? I think it's very possible because, very different body types and potentially different roles. But Ladd McConkey walks into the NFL right now about as good as route runner, I think, as maybe Josh Palmer. Different body types. They can't quite do everything the same, but he's about as good of a route runner, and he's definitely better of a route runner right now than Quentin Johnston. And I don't think you trade up for a guy. And maybe that was kind of the thing. Like if they waited and took him, okay, maybe Quentin Johnston has a similar role early on, similar to targets. But when you trade up for an individual like Ladd McConkey, you've got a plan. And I'm curious how much of how he's deployed is anything like maybe what they did with like Roman Wilson at Michigan.
Yeah, and to your point about the plan and like the desire to add him to the team, not only did they trade up to get him, Joe Ortiz also said that they had several calls to trade back. So they not only just wanted to get him and wanted the chance to take him at 37, they passed on the option to trade back and go get like a Roman Wilson or go get some other receiver or some other combination of players. So they turned down more picks. They went up for him. This is a guy that definitely they wanted to target on this team. I think that's pretty obvious here. So the depth chart analysis right now, we have it as wide receiver 2 with a more prominent role than QJ, but I think there's a really good chance that he does end the season as wide receiver 1 in terms of targets, just from a separation standpoint, from a creative touch standpoint. Ladd in his like introductory press conference was like, yeah, like I can do all the stuff that they want me to do, but also like I can be their creative touch guy. Mm-hmm. So you just get him a couple pitches, you get him a couple screens. Like I think there is a real chance that he does out target Josh Palmer. I think right now I would put money on Josh Palmer being the leading target getter. But if we get to the end of the season and Ladd has more targets, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised.
Yeah, me neither. And if Josh Palmer has any kind of injury, concussion, etc., and Ladd McConkey is healthy, if he takes that job, I don't think he's giving it back. Especially if Josh Palmer isn't in their long-term plans. Like McConkey, you've got it for 4 years. Palmer, potentially just the next one. So I'd understand why they'd move on. And I think at this point in the draft was really when the next pick is a Michigan player. But they very clearly could have just taken a Michigan player here. Like you said, Roman Wilson or even Junior Colson at this point. So I think it really does mean a lot and then indicates things moving forward, how we project the draft for the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh is just not going to take Michigan players. He's going to take the best guys that are there. And so to trade up and not trade back to take Roman Wilson, but to trade up for Ladd McConkey is pretty sweet.
Yeah, several draft analysts were like, yeah, he's going to draft like 4 or 5, and then he's going to sign 3 or 4 after the draft too. And like Adam Schefter going on day 2, and it's like both of these picks are going to be Michigan players for the Chargers. It's like, well, there are other players at the draft. So, they ended up with 3. That's great. I think it shows that Jim knows his stuff, and he's willing to not just stick with who he knows. He's willing and able, and he always has been, to think outside of his own comfort zone. So information from the Beast, Dane Brugler had him as wide receiver 5 and 31st player overall. We talked about this, but on the stream on Friday, but Ladd only had 2 FBS offers from Army and Kent State before Kirby Smart went in and offered him after watching his basketball game, which is, for anybody who knows anything about football recruiting, that's very, very rare. So kind of speaks to the athlete, the person that Kirby saw that day. So like you go from Army and Kent State to Georgia, it's pretty crazy. He was Georgia's 23rd ranked recruit of that specific class out of 25. And this is a guy who was their third player drafted this year. If I'm not mistaken, am I forgetting somebody? No, because he went ahead of Lassiter, right? Yeah. So he was their third draftee from this class. So it just kind of shows you the kind of worker and person you're getting here. And then for all of he's a slot only guys. He played 70% of his snaps in college out wide. He also had 13.3 yards per punt return. So it does give them some versatility and flexibility back there. And then teammates and scouts always called him a confidence booster and a student of the game. And again, I think this is somebody who is just consistently had to grind and be able to earn his keep. Like this is at Georgia. This isn't like he was at Army or Kent State and was instantly the wide receiver one. Like he had to beat out all of these guys. I mean, he forced Adonai Mitchell to transfer to Texas for God's sake. So this is somebody that is consistently willing to put in the work. And we talked about like a Harbaugh guy and, you know, like a glass eater type, but that's not necessarily like how you picture Ladd. But this is a guy who's going to consistently put in the work to make sure that he's always putting his best foot forward.
Yeah. Who has the effort and the drive, the inherent motor, everything, the will to take their current status, whatever they are, and become a better version of themselves? Michigan did that with again, their recruiting class is 14th. It's still very good, but they won a national championship with a different tier of recruiting class than like a Georgia. So I'd understand why someone like Harbaugh or Ortiz would look at McConkey, someone who was kind of ignored, isn't the biggest guy, you know, not the most built guy, whatever, and watched him turn himself into one of the best prospects in the draft, one of the, at least top 50. So I think just that means a lot. And there's a lot of players on this list that definitely, I think, fit that bill. And honestly, even some of the undrafted free agents.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the strengths and concerns here for Mr. Ladd McConkey. You were higher on him than I was, certainly than most of Chargers Twitter was. Both of us were higher on him than Chargers Twitter was. So I had him at 31st, wide receiver 7, early round 2 grade. You had him at 22nd, wide receiver 5, early round 2 grade. Was he your first non-first rounder?
I had like 4 or 5. I think I ended up with 18 first rounders or something. So it was like him, Barton, DeJean, kind of that tier. But he was right there.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I did have Jalen Polk higher on my specific wide receiver board, but as we talked about, I thought Ladd was a much better fit for like what they needed and for the kind of type that this room needed. So 3 positives. We've kind of talked about this a bit here. I want to specifically highlight the third one, and then we can talk about the route running and stuff like that. But the 16.6 yards per rush blew me away. Like I was not expecting that kind of production from him as a ball carrier. And that's why I think also like there is just more potential here than like, oh, this is your slot guy. Like, no, like this is a guy who you're going to get the football to in several creative ways. And you could get him on crossers, you can get him on slants, you can get him screen touches, you can do jet sweeps. The creativity after he gets the ball was really surprising to me based off of his reputation when I first watched him, because he does have that like, oh, like he's a slot at the next level. He's white. Like he has that reputation, but then you watch him and the creativity and juice with the ball in his hands is really outstanding. There are several plays against Missouri where I was like, is that Ladd or is that Bowers? So like the yak potential here is very, very underrated for Ladd McConkey.
It really is. And to your point, both Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz said like, yeah, he's a little bit of Bowers. He's like Bowers light in a certain
like they
sense.
said it like 3 or 4 times too.
Yes, you can read the media transcripts. They specifically brought up Bowers, and you know maybe I guess because they're teammates, but you don't just compare someone to Brock Bowers. You don't compare. You just randomly make that offhand comparison. It wasn't even about like usage, just how they were with the ball in their hands. And I totally get it. I was stunned by the 16.6 yards per rush. I was curious what it was because I was watching, I think in 2022. He had like a 70-yard touchdown as a rushing attempt. Yeah. And this dude can flat out fly. And the way he can stop and go when the ball is in his hands, a screen, there's that play against Florida, or maybe it's like a dig or a crosser or whatever. He catches it and then he just stops and then runs another 40 yards for the touchdown and meets the whole defense to the end zone. Like what he can do with the ball in his hands is really special. It's almost like the way we kind of envisioned Zay Flowers working out for the Chargers. Hopefully it kind of works out the same way, just the way he get the ball in his hands and he's special that way. He was super fun to watch. We've talked about the rest of it, 4.38, great. Agility testing, awesome. RAS, great. The out route stuff is really fantastic. And I think, was it Trevor? It might have been Trevor Sycamore and Nate Tice who said like they think he's the best out route runner in the draft. Like specifically, that was his best thing. And I agree.
That was Hartman.
It was somebody.
Yeah.
Hartman?
Matthew Harmon.
Oh, Harmon. Excuse me. That makes sense. Yeah. Good, because he's the one who charts all that too. Yeah. So that's totally fine with me. Yeah, he's awesome. The concerns are obviously there, both the size thing and an injury thing. There's a couple of these that pop up in these profiles. They say the Chargers cleared all that and they felt comfortable with that. I'm fine with that. Frankly, like you then take, not that Georgia was some, crap program by any means, but we do feel confident about the direction the strength and conditioning staff is going. So I feel fine in that regard. The big questions are, you take a receiver here, and I think maybe this is where fans were disappointed. Can he be a wide receiver one in the future? Can he win versus press on the outside?
Sure.
And that remains to be seen. I think he can be very productive, but and he was not Rome Odunze, the prospect, by any means. But can he be your number one in the future? Is he always going to be a wide receiver too? And then again, like, is that really a problem? I don't really think it is.
Yeah, so I guess finishing the conversation about the injuries here, it's not like there's anything degenerative here. Dane Brugler has it as turf toe, a minor back injury, and then he rolled his ankle and missed a game. So like it's not like this is, the Chargers do have a concerning injury history later on this show that we're going to talk about. So Ladd's injuries are not necessarily that too concerning for me. The success rate against press was low. It was like his lowest thing on the reception perception profile. But I think that's also part of like it's on you as an offensive coordinator to scheme him up and make sure that he's not an X receiver. So like give him opportunities to get off the ball, put him in motion, give him a runway. You don't have to put training wheels on him by any means, but if that's your concern, I think you're doing okay. And that's why he's a second round receiver. Like if he were great against press, he's probably a first round pick, like all day, every day. So, I don't want it to frame it as like this guy is an elite wide receiver prospect. I really, really liked him. I graded him very, very highly. But if the one concern that I have is against press, like I can kind of live with that because there are ways for the offensive coordinator to scheme around that as opposed to making him a big X because he's 5'11", he's $185. He's not going to be an X. I don't know how much press he's going to face in the NFL.
Exactly. He can't win versus press on the outside as an X. Fine, don't make him do that. Like,
it's a pretty simple solution.
Right. And it's not like he didn't excel, in the slot in college. Like, all he can do is work outside. Yeah. This isn't like, not to like throw shade at another receiver, but like, it's not like Keon Coleman, who was the X and was outside and struggled a lot. And it's like, well, can he develop? Like McConkey, like you don't need to just force him outside. So yeah, I get it, but this is why they get to the second round, and each of these prospects isn't perfect. That's why they get to their rounds. And the goal is just to find the right spot for him, not just force him to be something he's not.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, moving on to Junior Colson. Hopefully you saw our reaction to the Junior Colson pick. I think it was probably one of my favorite moments in Guilty as Charged podcast history. So why he was the selection, classic Ted guy. He's there every day, didn't miss any games. Classic Harbaugh guy. Yes, he played for Jim Harbaugh, but like when you envision like what is a Harbaugh guy, Junior Colson fits that to a T. He knows Jesse Minter's scheme from day one. I think that's really, really important because linebacker can be a position that is really difficult for prospects to come into the NFL and grasp the new scheme. And I'm not just talking about that. Like if he had gone somewhere else, like I think playing in Minter's defense would have helped him because I think like the Isaiah Simmons types who play as kind of like an overhang safety and then have to play linebacker. Schematically, it's a really difficult transition for them, but they put a ton on his plate at Michigan. He called plays, he communicated checks. He has all of the stuff up here that he already needs. It's just maybe there are some other kind of adjustments, but the Minter scheme, knowing it in and out, it's going to help him so tremendously. Like he could help Denzel Perryman with like how to adjust to the scheme. Like it's just a pretty rare thing. So I think that's going to be a big advantage for him. The last one, the rare luck of him being there at pick number 69. There were several people out there that threw his name out there as a sneaky round one option. The majority of people that I saw were talking about him as like a top 50 player. Dane Brugler even thought the Chargers were going to take him at pick number 37 a couple of weeks ago. So these are all, things that I think play into how you evaluate his grade, and doing so very favorably, in my opinion.
Yeah, this was, again, you saw a reaction. Yes, it was a two-parter kind of reaction to who it wasn't, but also who it was. Like, I genuinely believe if they took, like, if you told me the day before that they got him at 69, I would have been cheering and shouting for pure joy. The fact that they could get him that late, it was a gamble for them. We'll talk about that in a bit. But he is, like, I'm really trying to think about it. And look, I don't watch a ton of linebackers. But there's so much, at least the last 2-3 seasons, outside of some of the better guys, where linebacker is just you rush or you run blitz, and it's really cool. And you make plays. Spy. Yeah, a quarterback spy, and you make plays, and they'll get like 40 pressures and 40, run stops, and it looks like a ton of great statistics. And you turn on the film, and it's just them running forward. And look, it's awesome, and it works in college. It's great plays. You win games with this. But Colson is just different. He's so cerebral in a way that so many other linebackers are not. And we're not just gassing up this player and this individual because the Chargers took him. Like, we felt this way the entire pre-draft process. The moment I watched him, I'm like, I don't think there's anyone I've seen cover more ground or be asked to cover more ground than Junior Colson. I loved watching him. I know you did. He was someone that you talked about as a Harbaugh guy, a my guy, etc. Like, we could have gone with a lot of different Michigan players, but Junior Colson was someone that we highlighted, and I'm glad they took him. The one of the things that's really, really cool, and I'd be so curious to hear Navarro Bowman talk about him. But Harbaugh said that Navarro Bowman, who's played in the league for a very long time, had him as the top inside linebacker in the draft. Samesies. But it's really cool that like that was part of the process. And Joe Ortiz mentioned what we said previously. They were very lucky. Like, we thought that if we passed him at 37 overall, we probably weren't going to get him at 69. So that was and again, like, they took Ladd McConkey. Like, they liked him that much because they thought, oh my gosh, like, we could have had Junior Colson. We're going to pass on him for Ladd McConkey. And the more I think about it, and I wasn't so sure when they drafted him, but I kind of think he does end up being linebacker one as early as the week 1 of the season, because when was the last time we were able to say that X rookie draft pick literally knows the system? Like, this system is the thing that he was in and excelled in and knew front to back. When was the last time we were able to say that? You can rarely say that about any players. So for him to specifically be in this situation, I think he could definitely be linebacker one by camp. There might be some, Perryman's a veteran. Henley was here last year. Mix it in that way. And Harbaugh, like, the best guy will be on the field. Yeah. So I'm not panicking if he's not right now.
Yeah.
But
sorry.
Go for it.
I was going to say the Navarro Bowman thing too was really cool because he jumped in Junior Colson's press conference and was like, I stood on the table for you, which awesome. He didn't have to do. Like, the half the staff was at Michigan. Like, they all knew about this guy. But I think Navarro Bowman having that kind of lens also just really stands out about how much of an impact Junior Colson can make for them. In terms of the depth chart, last year in Houston, their kind of rotation they had Denzel Perryman, they had Christian Harris, and then Blake Cashman. And so to kind of start the season, Denzel Perryman was the green dot guy. He played all of the snaps. And then Harris and Cashman kind of split duties as the two younger guys who kind of like needed to continue to develop and continue to take their lumps a little bit. I could see something like that happening where Denzel Perryman is your like every down player initially, and then Junior is your run defender, and Henley is your pass linebacker, basically. And the two of them kind of continue to develop, and then maybe by the end of the season, Colson is linebacker 1, and Perryman is your run defender, and Henley is your pass defender still, or whatever the case may be. But I don't think they're going to overload Junior Colson with linebacker 1 duties unless he's actually ready for it. I think he could be. But like I mentioned, you never know with linebacker. Sometimes it is kind of a position that takes a bit, and that could happen here. Or he could hit the ground running for sure. I think that's totally possible as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so some relevant beast information. Brugler's linebacker 1, 42nd overall. If you don't know his story, he was born and raised in an orphanage in Haiti, was adopted by the Colson family at age 9, and he spoke 0 English at the time. Football is how he learned English, so I think that's also another cool tie-in here. He had the quote after playing with the 2 clubs on his hand that you see here in the picture. Unless I can't physically move, I'm going to be out there playing. 0 missed games in college, 0 penalties last season. That is TED to a degree, in my opinion. For those who don't know, TED is their abbreviation of their every day that they have in the weight room right now. Just means you put in the work, you're consistent, you show up to work every single day, you don't miss a beat, you're a reliable teammate, all that stuff. 196 tackles over the last 2 years was 59 more than second place. Again, 59 more tackles than second place is crazy. 59 tackles in a college season is like a good amount of tackles. This man had 196 tackles over the last 2 years in college. It's just an insane amount of production from Junior Colson.
Yeah, that is a wild stat. And you look at some of these players and linebackers, 60 tackles is pretty cool. I'd consider that productive per season. Almost 200 is insane. Fun player for sure. You had this grade. We had him similarly ranked, LB1 for both of us. I had him at 37th on my board. You had him at 32nd. Round 2 grades in early round 2. Like this was a 37th pick, I'm probably giving it like an A-, something like that. But the fact that they got him all the way at 69, it's an easy A for me, A+ for you. For me, we talked about it. He's a TED guy. He can cover the entire field, 100 yards that way, 53.3 yards in the width. Like, he's all over the field and can do that for you. Consistent low missed tackle rate. I love that. Like, just that's a big one for me with defensive backs, with linebackers, is not having a high missed tackle rate. This class feels like it had a lot more than usual. I don't feel like there were too many Brian Branch guys, but Junior Colson, in terms of missed tackle rate, is definitely one of those guys.
Yeah, and doing so with 2 clubs on his hands, having like no missed tackles and he can't wrap up properly is crazy, man. I think the range is solid. I think the coverage ability is fantastic. Instincts, like, you could write a ton of positives, and I did in my scouting report. The 3 concerns I think are pretty, again, similar to Joe Alt. One of them is circumstantial. Linebacker is difficult to adjust to. The other one is no testing information, but I'm not concerned about his athletic ability. I think he's plenty athletic. I think he has plenty of range. I think, you don't start at linebacker right away at Michigan. And if you're a poor athlete, like, this is not the old days of Penn State where they just have the old clunky linebackers. Like, this is an athlete for sure. The one thing about him in coverage, because I think he covers zone very, very well. I think he can match routes very, very well. Just like man coverage, I think he'll be a little late to adjust, a little late to flip his hips and run on certain occasions. There were a couple of wheel routes against Washington that got him where he's just like a little late. So it is very nitpicky, but that is one reason why I think some people will talk about him as as not a super great coverage linebacker. But as a zone cover linebacker, I think he is a fantastic fit there.
It was really difficult to write a negative for Junior Colson, to the point where I just left it blank and made you do it. Like, I really couldn't think of like not that he's perfect. Obviously, I didn't have a top 5 grade on him by any means, but like, where was I going to find the specific fault that I thought was worth bringing up?
Yeah.
So I'm really glad you found something to bring up, and I get that. Like, there's a missed tackle against Ohio State. Like, there's things you could point out, but yeah, he's awesome for sure.
Yeah, the testing information, if he had tested, they wouldn't have gotten him at pick 69.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that right now. So there's a negative. It could be a concern, but for the Chargers, I think it was their benefit this time around.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. We're 55 minutes in here. So this is, again, the deep cuts here. We have a ways to go, but we do have to pay the bills a bit here. So, Tyler, why don't you tell our listeners about Prize Picks?
Sure. Hey, guys, the NBA playoffs are on right now, and I suggest you go to prizepicks.com. Prize Picks is a skill-based daily money, real money daily fantasy sports game. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they're going to get more or less, I've been loving using them. I've been using them for the NBA playoffs. You can jump on, select more, select less. Are the Sixers on tonight? Go ahead and hit the less. If that's tomorrow, hit the less then. To make your selections, go to prizepicks.com/guilty and use the code guilty for our first deposit match up to $100.
Yeah, I actually have a coworker, Jonathan, shout out Jonathan, who watches the show. And he came up to me today and asked me which Prize Picks I liked for tonight's NBA playoff setting. So that was a fun one. But yeah, it's a great way to support the show and earn yourself some money. The next one here, Unified Healing is a new partner of the show. And whether you are a world-class athlete or a podcaster, a school teacher, school counselor, whatever, we all understand the importance of mental and physical well-being and proper recovery for top-notch performance. That's why we are so excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by the Energy Enhancement System. If you haven't heard of the EE system yet, you'll want to listen up and check it out. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in Fresno or down in Orange County or in Florida or Iowa, or wherever the case may be. We had a ton of international listeners over the weekend. I don't think they're international yet, but when you guys come to the States and visit, you can definitely check them out. And you can go to unifiedhealing.com/guilty to find a system nearest you. Again, that is unifiedhealing.com/guilty.
All right, next up, back to the regularly scheduled football program is Justin Eboigbe, the defensive tackle from Alabama. Why was he the selection? I think a lot of Chargers fans, including myself, we were surprised that he was that selection so early because I think we had him maybe around later. That's about where the range was, the grade, etc. But the run on defensive tackles was fast and unexpected. I really didn't see some of these tackles being taken as early as they were. I mean, the Rams traded up and gave up a 3rd-round pick next year for Braden Fisk, right? Tavondre Sweat was taken way earlier than I thought. Yep. The Falcons traded up for Ruka Rororo. Like, there was a quick run on these defensive tackles in round 2 and in round 3. I didn't expect that to happen. So I think that really pushed up the need for the Chargers to take a defensive tackle early on. He also just completely fits the Minter mold. I know some fans were worried, like, wait, why not Brenden Dorless in this spot? And I like Dorless more, but I don't know if he specifically fit what they were looking for here. And it makes perfect sense why they went with him. He's a high motor player, power first, Minter mold kind of player. So it made sense why they went with him here early. Even though it surprised me initially, I get it given the run on D tackles and his fit with the team.
Yeah, from the D tackle perspective, once the Falcons traded up for Rook, I was like, oh no, brother, this might be bad for the team. But I think they came out okay with Justin Eboigbe, excuse me. Quotes from Jim Harbaugh, Joe Ortiz. This was only Joe. Jim Harbaugh did not do a presser after day 3, so we just got Ortiz for the last ones here. He said that I think his base position is a 5 technique as a defensive end, but you've seen him at Alabama. He plays the 6, the 7 technique. Then he moves down to the 3. He's athletic. He's a sneaky pass rusher. He's great at picking. He's great on twists, kind of relentless motor. I think you see that motor on several different occasions. You know, there are a couple plays where he's chasing down backs from the backside. You mentioned a time where he chased down Brock Bowers, who is no slouch in terms of his athletic traits. So you see the motor kind of all over the place in different ways. You know, the Chargers are going to pick and twist much more frequently than we are used to seeing. That's not really something that Brandon Staley's defense did a whole lot of. So you need players who are going to be a little bit more selfless. You need players who are willing to do that kind of dirty work. And he has the physical motor and ability to make that happen. Depth chart analysis is maybe a little tricky because I do like the player, but I think also this is another position that just can be a little tough for players to hit right away. So I think he could push Otito Ogbonia for the starting base defensive tackle alongside Puna Ford. But Otito's been in the NFL for 2 years now. He understands like what that's like. He can play nose. Puna can kind of move around. I think there's a chance that he starts, but I do think there is also a chance that they do kind of take it slow with him a bit. I do expect him to play, but I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed that he is a starter right away.
Yeah, this is the most tricky one to figure out because they could do several different things, and they also have a third edge rusher. So, like, when do you use Thule? When do you use Morgan Fox, who's very different? You sign Puna Ford. You have Otito, who's 326. I don't really care. Like, you do what's best for your team, obviously, and they will do what's best for the defense. But it's somewhere between like just having a body this year, but also someone you feel really good about developing because his potential is awesome. I loved watching him play. I loved one of the few guys I knew was good just watching him in passing. So, yeah. I think this is a solid selection for them. He's Dane Brugler's DT 14. At a certain point, Dane Brugler, like, he's a top 100. And after that, I don't know where they have some of these guys ranked. All I know is that he's DT 14. The big one is at the time, career-threatening spinal cord injury in 2022. We'll talk about that in a bit. That same year, his brother also passed away. Nick Saban had a quote, I probably have more sentiment for him because of what he's gone through than anybody else that we've had on our team. I mean, that's going through a lot. To go through that kind of year and then take 2023 and have a really, really solid to not, a great showing and get yourself drafted, I think means a lot. He also earned a degree in communications and a degree in sports management. Anytime these guys earn a degree, I try to put it on here because I think that's super, super cool. A lot of these guys earned a second degree too, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not trying to be ESPN 2 years ago and put like all the sad things on here, but I think it's worth like pointing out when these guys have adversity in front of them and overcome it.
Yeah, no, 100% you have to bring it up because it shows like how far they've come. Like this guy, it could have been an injury that he never could have came back from, doing the injury and losing your brother. That's a lot. So it just kind of shows the resiliency, the mental toughness that Justin has brought to the table throughout his career.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I had him higher than you did. I had him 99th. He was a player I wanted to make sure to keep in my top 100. He was my 10th defensive tackle. I had a late third round grade on him. The overall pick selection is a B+ for me. Just there were some players on the board that I liked better, but you do have to take that into consideration. Tyler had him 124th overall on his board. He was DT 13 and was a round 4 grade for him. So we talked about his motor. We talked about just his high energy aspect. And I think expanding off of Joe Ortiz's point, he converts his speed to power extremely well on stunts and twists. This is a guy who can explode out of his stance. He is very, very aggressive. He has a great first step, and he's able to use his length and that first step in a variety of ways, whether it is as a pass rusher. That's really like the only aspect of him as a pass rusher. So it's the length, it's the power, it's the first step. That's where his bread is buttered. And I think he knows that because you see it all over the place as a run defender, as a pass rusher. He knows exactly how to win. He knows exactly where to take his chances and where not to. And he can really be aggressive that way as a defensive lineman.
Yeah, I'm really curious because they knew and he knew like you can twist, run him, do whatever you want with him, do some creative things with him, and he'll hit the quarterback that way. The conversion from I'm looping around the D tackle to I'm just racing to hit the quarterback as hard as I can. It's really impressive. Like his ability to do that or take on a guard. Awesome. At the same time, that means maybe you're not just doing a pure like beat the guy in front of you pass rush move. Sure. I'm curious how much that maybe stunted his ability to grow as a pass rusher because there were several times where I'm like, wow, that's a lot of power. Please, can you disengage? There's part of it. Like the power is really cool.
Yeah.
A lot of these offensive linemen can anchor down, like they can hold up. So what do you do after that? And I was waiting for a second thing to happen that maybe didn't. So there's a lot of tools there. I'm not saying he had like no other tools. Like he did flash on occasion, but I want to see that used more consistently at the next level.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's obviously why that and the neck injury, like this is why this guy is a 4th round pick and not, top 100 pick or top 90 pick or whatever the 3rd round is. So the medical stuff, he did get cleared. He mentioned in his introductory press conference, he can squat like 700 pounds now. Like there's no real issues right now. The thing for me is that's going to be more of a thing to monitor is like how long of a career can this guy play? Because we said the same conversation around Peyton Wilson, but Leighton Vander Esch had this basically the same kind of neck issue, and he just retired after his 4th season. He had several other neck issues after that neck injury. I hope that's not the case for Justin Eboigbe because I do really like the player, but this is a longevity concern for me. Just depends how long of a career he can potentially have. So I hope it's very long. I hope he plays on the Chargers forever, but it is something to monitor, I think, for his situation.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, let's get to Tarheeb still, the defensive back out of Maryland. Why was he the selection at the time? They definitely needed a corner by this point. We were looking for anybody, and we were yelling for, I don't know, Cam Hart, who they ended up taking a few picks later. They definitely needed a corner. It could have been the slot, could have been outside. And they really like his flexibility. They said his flexibility is a bonus. Some guys are really good at outside, really good inside. They feel like he can do both. And there's definitely a certain toughness to him and the tackling that's there that I think would make him a very solid slot corner option. Let's get through some of the quotes, and then I really want to dive into the analysis of the player, because I think that's the most important thing here. So Ortiz says, sometimes we were grading Tarheeb Still last year, thinking that you were grading somebody else. Maryland had 2 defensive backs go last year, one in the first round being Banks. So he said that, like, okay, we were watching these guys, other defensive backs, and we didn't realize that was Tarheeb Still, because he was holding his own with other guys that were considered were a first round pick, and I believe a 3rd round pick. This year, he's going to compete, I think, for the slot corner job with Jaw Taylor. Could play outside, but I feel like he's going to be in the slot primarily, especially when they take Cam Hart a few picks later. That feels like your outside corner competition. Still is your inside corner competition. Steve, I'm just going to move through this real quick so we can get to the analysis of the player, because I feel like that's the part we got to get to. So
go for it.
He was Brugler's cornerback 32. He was, I believe, at the time, like 271 on the consensus board. So this was the biggest like early reach, right, for the Chargers. He's one of 5 children. He lettered in track and basketball, was a wide receiver and corner in football, former 3-star recruit. He also had a 92-yard punt return touchdown, which is in the highlights the Chargers put up, and he blocked a field goal in 2021. So there's definitely an aspect of special teams here that is great. The grades obviously are not great that we gave this selection having watched him after the fact. So we didn't watch him ahead of time. No idea who. I genuinely did not know who he was. That's not to say he's a bad player. Just didn't get to him. Like, you try to get the top 250 on the consensus. Some guys slipped through. He was one of them. So we both gave this selection a C+. The positives for me, I think the way that I could see him playing the run, the way he takes on blockers, the way he can disengage or shed at the right time to loop or to duck under a blocker, feels kind of like the way Michigan did it. So I can see why they go, okay, that's kind of a similar way we play it. So let's go with that. Inside outside flexibility, great. And he does relish, tackling underneath, rallying and hitting in the run game, etc. So having watched film, though, because the first thing we did was look at the numbers and the penalties and the testing numbers, etc. And that was kind of underwhelming. I think having watched the film, this is the pick I struggle the most with. And that's at the time, it was the selection, didn't know who he was. Fine, let's watch the film. I struggle the most with this one in terms of why he was the selection at this spot. Honestly, instead of like a Cam Hart or somebody else at this point, I couldn't tell you all the other slot corners available, but I struggle with still a little bit. What did you see watching him?
Well, I can definitely tell you the slot cornerbacks available because I have that tab pulled up because that was something I was going to talk about.
Great.
The run defense, the tackling is really good. The blitz work is really good. If that's their vision of a slot corner, then I think this will be okay. And I think that is an aspect of Jasir Taylor's game that is also okay for what it's worth. I do like Jasir's ability as a tackler and a blitzer and as a run defender. We've seen that come to fruition. But the main issues here for me are our coverage. And I think there's similar issues whether he was an outside corner like he was in 2023 or in 2022 as the slot, is that their leverage issues all over the tape. And he's on the wrong shoulder. He's grabbing too early. He's staying on too long. He's not anticipating the cuts in the way that you like. Like, Yeah, we're going to talk about Cornelius Johnson later. He's not exactly like the snappiest route runner, and he kind of cooked Tarheeb a couple of times on tape. So the main issue is the coverage aspect of things. I just have a really hard time envisioning him being like a Bryce Callahan type of slot corner that is just like very rarely going to get beat. The consistency from a coverage standpoint is just not there for me, and I was hoping to like the player a lot more than I did, but it's one that I'm going to struggle with because I just kind of struggle to see him being an every down player, to see him being, an instant upgrade over Jasir Taylor. And there were players at that specific position that I feel like they could have taken that would have been clear upgrades over Jasir Taylor. There was some stuff about Jarvis Brownlee Jr., but in terms of his character, but he was still on the board. There was Chris Abrams Drain. He was still on the board. Those guys went at 145 and 146 a few picks later. There was Cha Smith Wade, who we talked about as a taller corner, but was a slot corner from Washington State. There was DJ James. There was also Kalen Carson. Like, it's not like they were running out of slot corners and there was like a big run, like the defensive tackle position. So there were other slot options here. And this to me kind of screams like we had a position of need. We're connected to the player. We know what he's about. We have a coach who's very familiar with him. Let's just take him because we know him. And this was the one like process error that I think showed up from Joe Ortiz, in my opinion, is just it was a reach of the consensus board. It was just not somebody that I think checked enough boxes here. So this is definitely one that I'm going to struggle with. And I don't want it to see like we're cooking him, like we're being mean. This is part of the reason why you guys come here and you're here for an hour and 12 minutes is to have these kind of conversations. So it's the one pick of the 9 that I struggle with, but it's worth talking about because they needed a legit starting corner and the slot. And I don't know if they got that done in this draft.
Yeah. So as far as I guess the obvious one is like the comparison to Jaw Taylor, I do think still his coverage and his tape overall were better than Jaw Taylor's. Jaw definitely looked like a special teams guy. I guess where I struggle is that I actually did like watching Still's tape and his coverage. Didn't love it, obviously. But to me, the big concern was like he was just hanging in there against these guys. And I'm like, all right, not too bad. And occasionally he'd get beat pretty rough, fall over, fine. No one's perfect, especially at this point in the draft. But I kept thinking, how is that going to be at the next level when everyone, every single game is going after you? How do you hold up? Now, granted, he gets to play in the slot, so I guess there's less than, not as much outside boundary stuff, but it's just tough when the testing numbers, like the testing shows up on tape. Like he just isn't quite fast enough to get there.
Yeah.
And then the penalties, like the grabbing, like that's also there. And the penalties bear out, 18 penalties with 5 declined the last, I think it was 4 seasons, maybe it's 3 or 4 seasons. It's 1,648 yards allowed in 4 seasons, 424 yards allowed the final season. So it's just really tough for me with some of these guys, like even with Jaw Taylor, I think he was a better athlete. Like you could see something there. And also he was a, late 6th round player, but you can maybe see something there where you go, okay, we can mold this. We can work with it. With Tarheeb still, I feel like there's less to work with, but I think this one maybe was more of like a temperament, play style, mentality selection. And I think they want to take that individual's, character and what he does and how he wants to play, and then make him a better player from there. So to me, watching him, it felt like they were in love with his feistiness, his willingness to hit, to disengage, to play the run, and there were moments of like when he used his hands, like pressing, like great, like all good stuff. So I think they just want to take not necessarily the film, but the temperament and turn him into the star that they hope he can become.
Yeah, that's fair. And Dane Brugler's first sentence of his scouting report was like, he loves being in press. So, this is a guy who's going to be physical. He's going to try and beat you up. The ball production, as people are pointing out in the chat, it is nice. But it's just the consistency aspect of things, the board, the way that it was. I feel like they could have gotten a better slot corner if that was their goal here. So we'll see how it goes. Joseph pointing out in the chat, I actually messaged you about this because my whole thing was like, oh, like maybe he's like their run defending slot, and then Asante Samuel Jr. is like your pass covering slot. The Chargers just did this with Jasir and Asante, and it didn't go so well. Like teams would learn, like NFL teams are very smart. Like if this is how they employ these two players, they're gonna figure out that like, oh, if Still's on the field, they think we're gonna run. Let's pass. If Asante is on the field, they think we're gonna pass, so let's run. And it's not, again, it's a process issue for me, not necessarily a player issue. Like I do think he does have some high quality attributes to him, but
Yeah.
I just kind of wish that they would have waited, or they could have taken one of the other slot corners that was still on the board.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we can get to Cam Hart now, which like instantly changed the previous selection because now you kind of feel a lot better.
Yeah.
You loved Cam Hart more than me, so you take it away with Cam Hart.
Yeah, why he was the selection. Obviously, the Chargers needed a true outside corner with size and speed. Jesse Minter said from a Michigan quote that they really value size and speed, and they can kind of teach the rest of how they want to play the position. And Cam Hart is definitely that. The connection to safety coach Chris O'Leary certainly played a factor here. It's kind of a common theme here that the Chargers did have a lot of connections with these players, and obviously it held some weight. My favorite thing about him is that he was so comfortable on an island, and I mean that both against the run and as a pass. There are several corners who are big and tall, but you get them kind of on that island of like an outside counter, a jet sweep, a toss, and they're just kind of not, they don't really know how to come up and make the play. They don't know, do I avoid this pulling guard? Do I take the guard head on? There's a lot of hesitation. There's not a lot of instincts, and that is not the case with Cam Hart. He's very comfortable out there being the last line of defense. He's also very comfortable playing the boundary, playing the bigger receivers. He's not afraid to hand fight. He's not afraid to press. And this is a guy that, we'll get to some of the concerns here, but just from a positive standpoint, this guy goes earlier in the draft all day long. So I think this is a value selection from the Chargers. His upside here is that of a high-end corner too, in my opinion. He can play the boundary, be physical, and I think that's ultimately why he was selected for the Chargers.
Yeah, the first thing I noticed in the USC game that I watched, they just let him be on that island, and it was like, okay, let's go throw a screen. Or I think Caleb Williams like ended up going back to his check down, and it's like it's Cam Hart to stop the play, or it's a touchdown, and then he just smacked the first receiver. Then later, I think USC was more backed up to their end zone, but he hits the guy for to force a fumble. Like that comfort on an island is so huge. Yeah, he was a ton of fun to watch. Easy steal for me. I think everyone really, really loved Cam Hart here. Joe Ortiz says, the traits are outstanding. He's highly competitive. He can challenge all throws when he's in position. Length to recover, speed to recover. And that's kind of what I was hoping for with like Still, for example, like the length, the speed. Like there's a lot of stuff here you can develop and take and mold into a starting caliber player. He's definitely going to compete with Asante Samuel Jr. and Christian Fulton for starting outside. I don't know that he's like officially CB1. They'll definitely, compete to be out there with Asante Samuel Jr., I think. And he just presents a completely different size profile, body type, athletic profile than Asante Samuel Jr. So, I don't know if he'll be like CB1 by next season, but I think he's going to be a starter for a very long time. He's a great pick.
Yeah, great instincts, great size, great speed. We're not too far removed from the Chargers having a cornerback trio of Asante Samuel Jr., Bryce Callahan, and Jasir Taylor in a playoff game. So this this kind of size profile, it matters. Obviously, Dean Leonard is a bigger, faster corner as well. So it is going to be fascinating to see how they handle the cornerback duo outside, because Asante is not necessarily their style, but like it's undeniable that when Asante's at his best, he's a high-end corner too in this league. Christian Fulton has the talent. We haven't necessarily seen him put it together. And then you have these two young guys as well as Jasir Taylor. So the cornerback battle, man, I think early leader for like most interesting position battles in training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You want to handle this one?
Yeah, sure. So he was Dane Brugler's CB19. Last, sad story thing I'll put up here. But Cam Hart's mom had the first of 3 brain aneurysms when he was 8 and was diagnosed with a neck tumor. Dane Brugler mentions that she's okay now. I mostly bring that up because in the reaction video to him being selected, clearly very emotional in that video. I think his mom was right there too.
Yeah.
And so I just thought like, I could see why someone would be so emotional in that moment, why his family's all rallied around him. Totally get it. Was recruited by Notre Dame for both offense and defense. They just said, hey, like pick what you want to do and you can do it. And so he played defense, obviously. In the end, degree in political science, same as my dad. Great. One of Feldman's freaks. He ran 23 miles per hour. So there is some like conversation about his 40 time. The 23 miles an hour is pretty good. He's also high school teammates with Chris Jenkins and is best friends with Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah, Kyle Hamilton was actually at the draft party for what it's worth. So
nice.
Yes. And Cam Hart from Baltimore. Kyle Hamilton obviously plays for the Ravens, so that was an easy one. So I was much higher on him than basically anybody else, I think, around. He was 50th on my board, CB8. Had a low round 2 grade on him. I'm giving this pick an A because of the value, because of the potential starting caliber corner here. You had him at 67th, cornerback 11, around 3 grade. You are also giving the pick an A. We talked about some of the positives here, so I'm not necessarily going to rehash that, but the concerns here, the big one is the history of shoulder injuries, which required 3 different surgeries. I believe it was 2 on one shoulder, 1 on the other, if I'm not mistaken, from Dane Brugler's report on it. So that's the big one why he fell in the draft, again, because this kind of profile does typically go earlier. And then the limited ball production, despite somebody who was a former wide receiver, only had 2 career interceptions, which came in the same game. So outside of the one game, he has 0 interceptions in the last 3 years of starting. So that is definitely a concern, but I think the film is generally fantastic for Cam Hart.
Yeah, it is. I definitely didn't know about the shoulder surgeries at the time, so that's definitely concerning and would certainly speak on why he fell as far as he did.
Yeah.
I think his tape is much better than where they took him at 140.
Yeah.
So I get it, but the upside is there. This is somehow both like a high risk and a low risk move at the same time. Like, yeah, there's some risk here, but the upside is there. And his film is just great. Like, even though I was lower on him than you, still had him at 67th. So it's an A for me. Loved the selection. Speaking of loving selections, if you saw Alex's reaction to the Kimani Vidal pick, that is definitely loving a selection. The Chargers needed a running back and a reliable one. And I don't mean just like any running back, like someone who has a history of carrying the rock. And he certainly did. And we'll talk about that. I think he's a very well-rounded back. They talked about all the different things he could do. In particular, watching him, there was just this clear contact balance and core strength. It was very difficult. Like, there's an aspect where bigger, heavier guy knocks smaller guy over, sure. But there were moments, several moments, where someone would try to tackle him high, and you could just tell, like, he wouldn't budge. There's a certain contact balance that he has and core strength that he has. That was fantastic. So I understand why they took him. They needed a running back. Even though he's not a bigger guy, he certainly doesn't play like a smaller guy.
Yeah, that was like word for word Joe Ortiz's quote as well. He also said that DBs are closing in on him and he'll just punch them with a stiff arm and just keep going. He also offers something in the passing game as well. When you watch him block, it's impressive. He will throw it up there against a blitzing linebacker. The pass protection was definitely it was the first thing that stood out to me, because pass protection is such an issue for college running backs, and see Isaiah Spiller, because they don't do it a whole lot. It's not something that college offenses require of them. But Troy's offense, it's a little bit more old school. He did have to pass protect. And then also it was like the main thing that kind of made him shine at the Senior Bowl, because when you go to the Senior Bowl, it's really tough for running backs to stand out, but people who were there, shouted him out as somebody who was doing fantastic in the pass protection reps. So that's definitely an impressive attribute for him. There's a lot of love out there for Kimani Vidal right now. Fantasy football fans obviously love the pick. But even like a Brett Coleman has said, like, hey, like this could be their best running back, and it wouldn't shock me right now. He was very, very high on him overall. Loves the fit for the Chargers. I think he probably starts in the competition for RB3 duties. But I think he could eventually push J.K. Dobbins for RB2. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins does not exactly have the cleanest build of health. So, if J.K.'s health is kind of a struggle, then maybe Kimani does just kind of right away from the jump of training camp, sees that role for RB2. But I do think he is probably their RB3 in the short term.
Which is not a problem. They have no problem rotating backs. J.K. Dobbins had a press conference today, and they asked, are you going to be ready for training camp? And I think he said something like, well, if it's up to me, then yes. But you never know, and it's above my pay grade sometimes. So, like, that wasn't exactly like, yeah, I'll be ready for day one.
He did say he was 100% healthy for what it's worth.
Right. So,
a different question.
Yes. We'll see. Obviously, I hope he stays healthy because that would make a heck of a 1-2-3. But if he's healthy, and Dobbins, has a bit of a setback, I could see him taking RB2 this season, but like no rush. As Edsky points out, this running back room looks good. I agree. It's a very solid room. Is it like an elite room? Maybe. I don't know. We'll see with Dobbins, but it's a pretty good 1-2-3.
Yeah. We talked about some of this stuff yesterday from the Beast, but Brugler's RB21. So Brugler was a little bit lower on him. He also said that he's not a big home run guy, like in terms of like speed threat. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, this is a guy who ran like a 4.44, so this is a very fast player. But that is Dane Brugler's assessment of him. He did play linebacker and running back in high school. The crazy part of his evaluation in the Beast was that he had offers from LSU and South Carolina and still decided to go to Troy. Like, it's just kind of like you don't see that a whole lot, especially in today's college football world. He got a degree in exercise science. He had 3 different 200-yard rushing games in 2023. Just an insane amount of production. We mentioned the pass catcher, 0 drops this past season, which is just fantastic from a profile standpoint. You love to see that. It was an issue that like Marshawn Lloyd, who we really liked, had some drop issues, fumble issues. Not a thing with Kimani Vidal. And then Troy's all-time leading rusher. Again, this is a guy who instantly came in and was their best player on the team right away for Troy.
Yeah, he was a ton of fun. I didn't have him RB21. I don't even know that I watched 21 running backs though.
Neither did I.
But I liked him more than that. The home run hitting thing, like I don't think Audric Estime is a home run hitter. Maybe that's like because he does not run that. He's for the 4.7. Like I get that. But I feel like he had enough of those. I don't think you have 3 200-yard rushing games without hitting a couple of home runs.
Right.
Dennis says Vidal plays anywhere near Tyjae Spears, then we got a good one, and he's really good in pass pro. Yeah, that'd be great. Could have also taken Tyjae Spears last year, but whatever.
Yeah, I put that up there because I was curious because you loved Tyjae Spears. We all did.
They're not the same player, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Tyjae Spears is my RB3, so. And we'll get into the evaluations here. Spears had a whole different like numbers profile.
Yeah,
although fair. He was missing a couple ACLs. So he was RB 11 for you, 114th overall, RB 16 for me, 130th overall. Had a round 4 grade on him, so great. A- selection for me, A selection for you. For me, it was mostly like, okay, did they need another position here? Where's your center? I think the next 3 selections I give an A- to. Because I'm basically like, where's the center? Because they might have needed some other body, but it's okay. We talked about the balance. We talked about the production. I think he's a really solid, like great to elite in size. Nope, not size. Speed, explosion, and agility. Great. The mileage is definitely concerning. 871 total touches the last 4 years. Like you walk into the league as someone who's 5'7", like someone said, 5077 or 5077. That's 5'7" and 7/8 of an inch. Smaller-ish guy, a lot of carries. And then you mentioned little to no special teams experience. Was that something from the Beast or?
Yeah, he basically had zero reps from punt return, kick return, punt coverage, anything. Because Like he was their best player right away. Like
Yeah.
some of these guys just don't do it. Like Zach Moss never played on special teams because he was their best running back like right away. So, but for the NFL, it's like RB3 usually is a special teams player, so it is going to be an adjustment for him. But I think he can do it because he's a fantastic pass blocker. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be a huge issue, but it is going to be an adjustment. He's never done it before, so
yeah,
he's going to have to learn. Looks like we got the Bolt Bros Chargers podcast here in the chat. Appreciate the Bolt Bros for tuning in. Hope everything's going well, fellas. Yeah, so I think the big concern is the mileage. You know, it's a position that is consistently going to be something that you have to monitor there. But he is going to be their RB3, I think. Like I can't imagine he's going to have a ton of mileage this year, maybe not next year. So this is probably like a high-end RB2 is like best case scenario, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
And so for that, I think like where they took him, that potential, that's why it's an A for me. And, you know, there's the emotional attachment of them finally taking a day 3 running back that we all liked as opposed to the previous ones. So, yeah, I'm cool with the Kimani Vidal pick. We'll move on next here to Brenden Rice, a very popular selection amongst fans. I put a poll on YouTube of which jersey we should give away, and Brenden Rice was 4th on that list. So fans are really excited about this one. So I think why he was the selection, I think you needed somebody to balance out the Lad McConkey selection. The Chargers ended up taking 2 of them, big-bodied ex-receivers. And I think, you know, even though I was lower on him, and we can dive into this in a little bit, I was lower on him, but in the 7th round, like that's too much to pass up. Like we've seen the opposite of this, where a player like this is somebody that Tom Telesco avoids. And I'm glad that Joe Ortiz said, hey, you know what? Like, we're going to take this player. We believe in the person. We believe in the potential here. You know, Jerry Rice is pictured in this photo here. I don't think that necessarily matters all that much. But the Chargers do need to potentially prepare for a post Josh Palmer world in 2025, where they need an X receiver to play opposite of Quentin Johnston, let Ladd do his thing as the Z, as a slot. And the potential of Brenden Rice hitting at this point in the draft was far too great to pass up.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. He was, and we'll talk about where we had him, but you know, while we didn't love him as like a top 10 receiver in this class, maybe he was in another class. But by the 7th round, I'm not really even sure why he fell this far. I don't know if there were rumblings of something that came out, but him being there at that point was far too, like, you had to take him. You basically had to take him. And I think the same with the next receiver in Cornelius Johnson. If you don't have Josh Palmer next year, or if Josh Palmer gets hurt, Quentin Johnston's not your X. You're not really developing him to be an X unless you were the Chargers last year, which felt like misuse and the wrong idea. So if Josh Palmer gets hurt or he leaves next year, like, you got to develop an X. And Darius Davis, love him, smaller special teams guy. Lad McConkey, love him, not your X. Brenden Rice could be your future X. I don't want to put the pressure on him to do that next year by any means, but you're gonna take guys and you're going to develop them, and he was absolutely worth the selection. I think Joe Ortiz said a lot of explosive plays from him down the field, long touchdown production. He can really stretch the field vertically. So I think, and you think, and we all think that he's going to compete with Cornelius Johnson, who they took after him, and then Simi Fehoko for like wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, something like that. No surprise there. Like, he's not cracking the top 3, but he could certainly start competing for a wide receiver 4 and 5. He was Dane Brugler's wide receiver 18, so definitely higher on him than Cornelius Johnson. I put that his dad played football once. He definitely did.
Just like 25 seasons in the NFL or whatever it was.
Something like that. Yeah. No big deal. Committed to Colorado over Michigan, and of course went to USC after that. He didn't miss any games in 2 seasons at USC. He had 1 touchdown every 3.75 catches. He had 12 touchdowns in 2023. And then 80% of his catches were first downs or touchdowns. So that kind of data profile is definitely alluring.
Yeah. So I had him graded as my 137th player overall, wide receiver 21. You also had him as wide receiver 21, but 107th overall. I gave this pick an A- just because of the value. And I think that's kind of the same vibe I'm getting from you. You know, you mentioned the first down touchdown rate. 36 first downs on 45 catches is very, very high. You know, it's somebody that Caleb Williams always seemed to find on scramble drills as well. So speaking to his ability to connect with a quarterback, I think is a positive as well. His frame, he knows how to use it. I think similar to Justin Eboigbe, he knows where his bread is butter, and that is that physical frame. He is able to box out defenders. I do like his ability to come back to the football as well as something that really stood out to me from a route runner. There is a physical element of his game, and he is like one of the few receivers that I watch that actually does like to block, and that shows up on tape. So I think that's some good coaching from Dad on his part, his ability to make sure, hey, if you're not going to be a high volume guy, let's make sure you can go out and block. And as Roman Wilson said previously, no block, no rock.
Absolutely. Steve Smith, I was listening to his like 20-minute breakdown of Brenden Rice. He really likes him and specifically pointed out that physical element of his game. Like if it's you versus a defensive back, he's going to, kind of play chicken with that defensive back and try to hit him as hard as he can to see if you'll flinch because he wants the contact. A lot of DBs do not. Conversely, and kind of oddly, his contested catch rate this past year was really low, which is a bit of a surprise for someone who has that frame, uses that frame, is physical. Just in general, the contested catch rate was not great. I think it was 20-something%, which is not great.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like a timing issue more than like a lack of ability.
Right. It's definitely not. I don't see him as being like unwilling or, not like angry enough to make those catches. Just, I don't know. I'd have to watch all of them. And I certainly didn't. I don't remember all of them. He's also I think the reason we didn't love him as much, he's not a, start and stop route runner, more of a glider than he is sharp. I think he's like a wind up and run sort of guy more than he is like a quick cut sort of guy. So maybe not his dad in that regard, but not the sharpest route runner overall. So I didn't love that aspect of his game. And some of the data profile stuff isn't great, but still very much so like him. I know people thought we should have been doing front flips after the selection. I do like it. I give it an A-, guys, but there are some concerns. Although I still have no idea why he felt this far.
Yeah, I think, you have to use him the right way. And there's a lot of stuff in the USC offense that a player like him did not fit super well. They do a lot of like glance routes and a lot of slants and a lot of curls and a lot of hooks and stick routes. And it's just not really his thing. And that's okay. I think this is a player you want running posts, corners, go routes, digs. You want him downfield. And for the Chargers, that's exactly what they need. It is the X receiver role that they need. You use the size, you use the vertical ability, and that's kind of where you're at. You're not going to ask him to come out here and be a separator over the middle of the field and like be the security blanket. That's just not his game. So it's just that's kind of why we are fans of the team that had Keenan Allen for 12 years. Like we are fans of that kind of receiver who can get open at any moment. And that's unfortunately just not him. So you love the vertical profile. You love his ability to connect with the quarterback and on scramble drills. And I think those are the more positives for me. And then even like I was lower on him, but I had him 137th overall. They got him in the 7th round. Like it's impossible to ignore that kind of value.
Yeah, I think so. Last but not least, value. A lot of the same overlap here, so we'll probably run through this a bit quicker. Cornelius Johnson, the receiver out of Michigan. Why was he the selection? Stat familiarity. I think that's definitely there. And I think he really fits that vertical play action passing game, deep threat sort of option for them and can also develop as a future X receiver. I did not watch him intentionally. I watched him plenty in passing, knew about him. I wish I had graded him, but that's my fault for watching every other Michigan player but the one they ended up taking on day 3. But that's fine. I thought a really cool quote from Joe Ortiz was, he might be the best blocking receiver in the draft, or certainly one of them. He gets after it. Same in terms of depth chart analysis. They're competing for wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. As far as the beast, so Brenden Rice was wide receiver 18 for him. For Brugler, Cornelius Johnson was wide receiver 28. So we like Brenden Rice a bit more. His mom was an anesthesiologist and earned her degree from Michigan. And then he earned his degree in communications and is also pursuing his master's. The 61 games that he played are the 3rd most in Michigan football history. And 94% of his career snaps at Michigan were outside. So yes, as Kyle Tucker says, he definitely get rock. I love you guys like in the chat making this these comments. It's great. You graded him. You ranked him. He was your wide receiver 22. So right after Brenden Rice, You had a round 5 grade on him, and you give the selection a B+. I did not watch him initially. I watched him after the draft, and I give his current grade an A-. I think I actually would have liked him more than Brenden Rice, but tough to say. There's definitely a bit more of an explosive element to his game that I think would have liked more. Although Brenden Rice, I think, is a better overall route runner. The positives, 9.9 RES is some serious athletic upside. I do see him making some very difficult catches. I ran through 2022 as well. Made some difficult catches. There's one on a comeback where McCarthy's getting hit. I want to say it's against Ohio State in 2022. He's getting hit, and Cornelius Johnson turns around to run the comeback, and he has to like somehow make this catch. I couldn't believe he made it. It looked like he didn't. They gave him credit for it, so I guess he caught it. And then he really felt like the drive spark or big play bomb guy from Michigan. They did a flea flicker with him for like a 70-yard touchdown. Every time you look at like the charting of how much he got on each play, it felt like, oh, here's 12 more yards, here's 15 more yards, here's 16 more yards. He really was a chain mover, like a big chunk play guy to get that offense going. The concerns, like the route tree is kind of incomplete. A lot of like post, corner, go sort of stuff. Some comebacks, but like not really like your twitchy, not Lad McConkey, right? Which is totally fine. Not that guy. Yeah. One of the things that definitely concerned me, his number profile overall wasn't great. His best competition, there are some gains against like Bowling Green and UNLV and another team to start the season where I think he had like 300 total yards in those 3 games. But then he plays Rutgers, Penn State, Ohio State, Iowa, Alabama, and Washington. And in those games combined, he just has 158 receiving yards. Now, it's a run-first team with Roman Wilson, with Loveland. Like, there's a lot of other options. It's not like he was the number one guy.
Yeah.
But I notice those things. I try to pay attention to those things. And then, as I mentioned, like he's not a short game, quick twitch athlete. There's definitely a thing for him that he does well, and I think it fits this team. But he's not like a twitchy route runner type either.
No, he's definitely more of a long strider runner. This is a guy who I think has a lot of build-up speed. If I remember correctly from Brugler, his like second 20 was like, I don't remember the specific number, but the second 20 of his 40-yard dash was like significantly better percentile than the first 20. So this is your vertical threat of vertical threats. This is also a guy that you want running downfield. Definitely not as good of a route runner as Brenden. I think Brenden is also a better, more creative yak threat. And I want to say Cornelius Johnson's yak per reception number is like really at the bottom of the class.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to like here in terms of a 7th round pick. This is a dart throw developmental option. Again, they need options if Joshua Palmer is potentially not on the team next year. And I thought that I put this in there, but as Sholoman pointed out, Cornelius blocked 2 punts in college. This is a guy who has definite special teams vibes to him. Fantastic blocker, great speed, aggressive mentality, and he has the experience on this. So this is somebody I think Ryan Ficken is going to love on this team. I don't know if they'll be able to afford to have him make the roster, but if he can have that kind of special teams experience, then Ryan Ficken has advocated in the past for players, and we know what kind of role he has on this team. So I could see Cornelius Johnson being kind of his next, special teams pet cat, if you will.
Yeah, I think that both guys will make the initial roster because they want to protect these picks. Like we see this all the time. They keep guys, during that process. There's cuts, there's additions, and then you cut that guy because you need to elevate an edge rusher or whatever. I think both make it. I think because of what you mentioned though about special teams, I think he would then be safer than Brenden Rice should they need to make a cut, even though they took Rice earlier. Johnson, with this speed, with that playmaking ability, with that special teams work, he's probably more safe. And we've seen the Chargers lean into that. Different regimes, but like great that you can, if you're kind of the similar types on offense or defense or as a running back, for example, we'll take the guy who can play special teams. Dotson over Spiller, for example.
Yep. All right. So class grades overall is our final thing here. We're an hour and 45 minutes. We appreciate you guys staying in the chat here. 500 strong. We love to see it. The overall class grades, I think, were pretty similar. I have an A-. You have an A. Just to recap here, for Joe Alt, I gave them an A-. For Lad McConkey, I gave them an A. Junior Colson, A plus. Justin Eboigbe, B plus. Tarheeb still, that's the one we both struggle with. A C plus for me. An A for Cam Hart, an A for Kimani Vidal, an A minus for Brenden Rice, a B plus for Cornelius Johnson. And then Tyler has an A minus for Joe Alt, an A minus for Lad McConkey, an A for Junior Colson, a B plus for Justin Eboigbe, a C plus, an A for Cam Hart, an A minus for Kimani Vidal, an A minus for Brenden Rice, and an A minus for Cornelius Johnson. Overall, like I said, A minus for me, A for Tyler.
Joseph says, I wish you guys were my high school teachers. Yeah, well, unless
I wish I was my own high school teacher too, man. You know?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is an A for me. The last, and I generally hover around like B plus for some of these drafts because I see what like the first round pick is a ton of weight. Generally, Telesco, gets Derwin James. So it's like, okay, that's a pretty good class. The floor starts very well, but this class, I think I've only given an A minus before for the Chargers, and that was when they went Rashawn Slater and Asante Samuel Jr. and Josh Palmer. Found some guys later on. There's my dog. So yeah, this is the best class I think they've had in a while, and I'm so stoked about it.
Yeah, for me, it's an A minus for different reasons, and like the way that other analysts are talking about this is the same kind of thing. Whereas, like, you look at that 2021 class, and it was like very heavily inflated by Rashawn and Asante Samuel Jr. And then the rest of the media kind of crushed the Chargers after that. That's how kind of the world that we've been living in. Like I can't remember the last time I ever gave a day 3 pick for the Chargers an A outside of Jamari Sawyer, who I had really highly, but there was the medical stuff. So just, I think from top to bottom, outside of the one pick, I love the process. I think they took a lot of great players here. I think they get a lot of instant impact. So, I'm not crazy about the way they handled the slot position. And I do wish they would have taken like a tight end or, maybe would have been able to like grab an interior offensive lineman. But outside of that, it's like really nitpicking. Joe Alt's your starting right tackle. Lad's your potential wide receiver 1. Junior's your linebacker 1. We'll see about Eboigbe, but he'll contribute. We'll see about the cornerbacks, but they should contribute. Kimani Vidal will contribute. And then you take 2 dart throw X receivers. You see what happens. And maybe one of them hits and maybe one of them becomes kind of your next like Tyrell Williams type or something like that. So I think there's just a lot of potential here to have like a really like tone setting draft for the Chargers that can pay dividends for the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And it's so nice to see, 9 selections here for them. Just like 2 more, dart throws, at bats, etc. They'll continue to do that. Just having more options here is fantastic. And we're going to get into tomorrow the difference between Joe Ortiz and Tom Telesco and how Telesco's drafted before. What did Ortiz do, better? What did he do differently in our eyes? Because this was, again, a better class than I've seen the Chargers have since Tom Telesco got there in 2013. So in over a decade. We'll see if it pans out. Obviously, we're not sure, but we're grading based on process. The results we'll see, but the process I really liked.
Yeah. Best, most favorite class. We've done a lot of homework on the class. We only didn't grade one player that they took. So that was definitely a lot of fun. Real quick, we'll zoom through some of these super chats. Quantum Humanics, would you have believed we traded up, not down? I definitely thought they would have traded down at some point. But when they traded up for Lad, they didn't lose a pick. And I think that was kind of the key from there.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know.
NSN says he's happy to relegate Pipkins to swing tackle backup.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm happy to do that, but I'm happy that he is the backup. I'm happy to have him as a backup on the team.
Yeah. Also says gap between Alt and second round OT greater than Neighbors and second round wide receiver.
Yeah, by a mile. And that was part of the reason you take Joe Alt early. That run on tackles was early. And if you wanted a 3rd round pick, no shot. They were all gone. So the Chargers, this was part of the, you play the game a certain way, you play the board a certain way. Alt McConkey is a better, tight on the board option than, Neighbors. And then at that point,
I think Patrick Paul was the next.
Probably Patrick Paul. Yeah. Who was like a consensus, like top 60, 70 player.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely better value for Alt and Lad. Brian, does Pipkins project a guard? Any chance he takes Sawyer's job? Jim Harbaugh said that he's one of their 5 best players right now, and they'll kind of figure it out, which is very true. Like, he is definitely a better football player than Bradley Bozeman and Jamari Sawyer, I would say. But I personally have a hard time seeing him transitioning to guard well. I think he is your swing tackle, and I think they figure out right guard with Jamari or some other potential veteran player down the road.
Yeah, I agree there.
Gabriel, I'm super excited that we picked Ladd, but secretly more excited Casey didn't pick up when they moved up, especially because he was mocked to them.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted the Chargers to jump into the first round and maybe take a McConkey over the Chiefs taking who they ended up with Worthy and trading up. But yeah, I agree.
Yep, same here. Luis, what receiver group is better, roster 3 or draft 3? I assume he's talking about the 3 on the roster previously and the 3 that were drafted.
I think he means QJ, Palmer, and let's say Davis versus the 3 that were drafted.
Yeah. I would say the 3 that were rostered, just because I really believe in Palmer, and I think Quentin is better than the other 2.
Yeah, when McConkey drops $140, on Kansas City in Arrowhead, sure, but like Palmer should earn the respect of being considered the best of the group, and then you can kind of alternate like McConkey maybe, then Quentin. So,
yeah. Gabriel said, "Rest in peace to anyone who had headphones in when listening to the podcast during the Junior Colson announcement. One of the best moments during the draft." Yeah, if your headphones broke, I apologize, but obviously you can tell we were excited about the pick.
Yeah, it was fun. That was a great reaction.
T. Perry, excited to see who develops into captains this year. Also love that without Eckler, Keenan, Mike, etc., Justin truly can step up as the veteran leader. That's an interesting point there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they got the edge rushers, obviously, and Bozeman's not like a younger guy. But yeah, Justin truly and he'll have to be for, in 10 more years, he's definitely that veteran leader, like the way that Rivers was. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Rashawn's gonna be a captain this year. I would be pretty surprised otherwise. I think he's ready for that next step of his career. Last one here. Jacob says, "Great work, guys. Appreciate how much work you put in every day. Loved all the background on these players. BTFU." Thank you, Jacob, for the support. Another guy that's in here quite often to drop in super chat. So we appreciate that, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Woo. Okay. Hour 52 after the draft.
What's funny is it felt really short, but I realized it's because we did 7 hours and 15 minutes the last time we were on. This was a breeze.
Yeah, compared to 7 hours for sure. Yeah, man, this was fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. This is a lot of in-depth work that we have put into this draft class. Sincerely, my favorite draft class that the Chargers have ever had. Certainly the most one that I have studied and watched. So really excited to see how it turns out, man. These players are a lot of good players here. I think at minimum you get 3 starters, which in general is a pretty good draft. So it was a great weekend for the team. Great weekend for the podcast. We appreciate all the great support. 13,000 views on a day 3 stream is still pretty crazy to me, but should be fun. All right, Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
Thank you all for still being here. 500 of you 2 hours into an episode about a recap of the draft is pretty incredible. Those who are asking about the undrafted free agents, we'll get to them. I'm not going to, we're not going to do a video tomorrow saying we've watched all 20 of them. That would be impossible. We still do our homework. We still do our process. So it does take time to get through all 22 of these guys, but we will. So probably next week we'll jump into it. Tomorrow will be about, Tom Telesco versus Joe Ortiz. Then we'll do some draft awards and draft superlatives, that sort of thing on Thursday. And then we'll get to the undrafted free agents once we've watched all the tape.
Yeah, potentially have 2 great guests coming on the show next week as well. So stay tuned for that one. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Hour 54 into the podcast. We appreciate you guys. Hope you enjoy it. Come back to this, revisit all the conversations, make sure bookmark this, review it, all that good stuff. Does help continue to grow the show. And that's it for the Guilty as Charged podcast. We'll see you tomorrow. As always, bolt up.